Hello and welcome back to the GMO Launch Conference. For this afternoon, our topic of this session will be Brazil and how to continue solar growth despite the COVID-19. You're probably familiar that Brazil has become a solid gigawatt scale solar market in recent years. With COVID-19 hitting hard Latin America's largest country, this session will discuss what the near future holds for solar in Brazil. I'm proud to introduce my dear friend Rodrigo will join us here and present. He's the co-founder and chief executive officer of the Brazilian Solar Photovoltaic Energy Association, the national association representing companies and professionals from all segments of the solar PV value chain with operations in Brazil. So he's also the co-founder and member of the board of directors at the Global Solar Council, global entity unifying and representing the solar power sector at the international level. Rodrigo serves as the main representative of the solar PV sector, so what he's telling us is really meaningful. He's directly interfacing with high-level discussion and decision makers. He's an active national and international event speaker like here today, media spokesperson and strategic advisor to ABSOLAR's associates members, dedicating himself to promote the development of the solar PV sector and market in Brazil. Rodrigo, it's an honor for me to have you here on stage. The stage is yours, and before you are starting with your presentation, I remind all the participants, if you have questions, you can post them in the event chat directory here, and of course we have enough time to hopefully discuss and answer all the interesting questions we have. So Rodrigo, now it's your turn. It's a pleasure for me to have you here.
Thank you very much, Florian. Here in Brazil, I would say good morning to you, good morning to everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today in this digital event. And first of all, I would like to thank Intersolar and SolarPower Europe for the kind invitation to participate and represent the Brazilian market. In fact, a gigawatt market. And as I will show you, even though we have this year a very challenging situation with COVID-19, Brazil will still continue to be, and already is, once again, a gigawatt market. So it is a pleasure to be here with you all today. I will speak on behalf of ABSOLAR, and I'm here to show you more about the data about the Brazilian market, the development of this electricity source in the country, and the prospects that we have for the future as well. I hope you guys are already seeing my presentation. Is this okay? Florian, can you help me confirm if everything is fine? People are seeing the presentation?
Yes, so it looks fine. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, ABSOLAR is the national voice of the solar sector. If you want to do business in Brazil, join us and participate on the discussions of the association. We have several benefits for our company members, and we currently represent around 600 companies from the solar PV environment and value chain, several parts of the sector involved. I'll pass through very quickly our member base, so you can see several slides with our associate members, national and international companies operating in manufacturing of components and equipments, developing projects, small scale, large scale, also companies that do business transactions, consultancy, and financial institutions that support the market, investors, and so on and so forth. So it would be a pleasure for us to have your company join ABSOLAR as well. And we look forward to having you on board and participating on the thriving Brazilian market. Well, first of all, let's talk a little bit about the Brazilian electricity sector. So as you can see, Brazil is already a renewable electricity sector per se. We have a lot of hydro. 60% of our electricity matrix comes from hydro. We have a lot of wind power. This is the second biggest electricity source in Brazil. A lot of biomass, the third biggest electricity source in Brazil. And since a few years ago, solar PV started with almost nothing. It was relatively irrelevant in our matrix until 2016, and then growth started. Now solar is the 7th largest electricity source in the country, represents roughly 3,000 megawatts in terms of large-scale power plants. And I'll show you the numbers also for small distributed generation, which is also very relevant in the country. And you can see solar is progressing, and soon enough, we'll be passing other fossil fuel sources to join the main renewable sources in the country. In total, Brazil has about 172 gigawatts of installed capacity. This is the largest electricity market in Latin America, and one electricity market that grows very fast every year. So also a big opportunity for new projects, small and large. There is also an important complementarity between the renewable resources in the country. So you saw that 60% of our electricity comes from hydro. And here you can see on green, this green curve, showing you that hydro has some variability, some seasonality throughout the year. There are months which we call dry months, where there is a low level of water available in the reservoirs. And there are what we call the wet months, with a lot of water available in the reservoirs to generate electricity. So good news is during the dry months, when there is less water available, we have a lot of other renewable resources available, such as solar, wind, and biomass. And if you look into solar, it is the most stable renewable electricity source option in the country available. This is the yellow curve here. So you see it's almost always close to 1, meaning it's very stable throughout the year, which is very good for the operational planning of the electricity matrix. So you can see that Brazil is a natural country for renewables and has a huge solar potential, one of the best in the world, and also a huge territorial area equivalent to the whole of the European territorial area. So it's a continental country that could become a solar leading nation in future years. And as you can see from the future forecast, here are the numbers from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. These are basically economic evaluations, show that solar, becoming one of the cheapest electricity options available in the country, will probably be the leading source by 2050, eventually even a little bit earlier, surpassing hydropower, wind, biomass, and other sources to become to represent almost 40% of the total installed capacity in the country. That's the prediction. So we are currently 1.6%, below 2%, and there is a potential to represent 38% of the country's electricity matrix with solar competitiveness in Brazil. So there is a lot of business opportunities and potential here. Now I'm showing you the development and the evolution of this market throughout the last 8 years. So you can see in 2012, the country was still starting new policies and regulations to support solar. On the small scale side, we had a net metering program, a national net metering program that's still in effect today, and that has been a strong driver for small scale and medium scale projects in buildings and also on land areas, up to 5 megawatts of installed capacity. And above that size, we have large centralized generation projects, large scale power plants, usually contracted through auctions from the federal government, but also now with the free market, direct bilateral PPAs between consumers and energy providers. So there are very interesting opportunities there coming up as well. And as you can see, by 2017, the market started to go fast and go forward, especially with large-scale projects, surpassing the first gigawatt, and from there onwards, at least 1 gigawatt per year. Good news is 2019 was a record year for Brazil. We had 2.1 gigawatts added in a single year, very strong growth in 2019. And you can see that there was a big contribution from distributed generation, who actually led the market growth with about 2/3 of the total installed capacity added in 2019. And now in 2020, although with the pandemic, although with a lot of uncertainties and also the exchange ratio playing against the evolution of solar in Brazil, we already surpassed 1.2 gigawatts of added capacity operational in Brazil. So Brazil, once again, is a gigawatt market, and therefore we are expecting and looking forward for the global market outlook of 2021, where we will gladly once again participate and share insights as we did this year. So if you are taking a copy of the global market outlook, please, you're very welcome to take a look into the Brazilian article where ABSOLAR details a little bit more about the numbers of 2019 and the projections for the future. So in total, solar already brought to Brazil around 30 billion reais in investments and more than 135,000 jobs to the market. It's a very strong contribution also in the economic side. So who is using solar when we talk about the small scale distributed generation market? So from the one side, we have residential consumers, so homes. They represent more than 70% of total systems and almost 40% of the total installed capacity / investments. And then we also have a very strong contribution from commercial and service buildings that are using solar to reduce their electricity expenses. And then we have almost equal shares of industrial consumers and rural consumers using solar. Participation from public buildings and services is still small, below 2%, but there is a lot of potential there. And ABSOLAR has been working with the governments, federal and state and municipality governments, to help develop new projects so that public buildings can start to use more solar to reduce their electricity expenses as well. So when we talk about the large scale market, then we can see that the growth that we saw on the market was very much supported by federal auctions from the Ministry of Mines and Energy. And here I want to highlight this red line where you can see the average price in dollars going down year after year to around $20.33 in the last auction of 2019. Now, when we look into this evolution, first auction in Brazil, more than $80 per megawatt hours. Last year, we had an auction with about $20 per megawatt hour. So you can see the competitiveness of this technology moving forward in the country. And now with this competitiveness, solar has become the most competitive electricity, renewable electricity source in Brazil when we talk about new projects. It has even surpassed wind power with its impressive 5 gigawatts of installed capacity, and biomass with another 5 gigawatts of, 15, in both cases, 15 gigawatts of installed capacity, and also hydropower, small scale hydro in terms of prices. So now solar is the #1 competitive source in Brazil. And because of that, we expect a change on the mindset and the planning of the government regarding expansion of the electricity matrix in Brazil, moving more into the direction of more solar, providing electricity at cheaper prices to the population and the society. And then, in the middle of this boom that I'm talking about, with very good news, there came COVID-19. And with the new coronavirus on the air and on the economy, we had the impacts coming and also affecting strongly the solar sector. So just so you know, if you're not following Brazil closely, currently the situation in Brazil is dire. Brazil is the second most impacted country in the world by COVID-19. It's a very bad ranking position to be this time, unfortunately. We have already surpassed 860,000 confirmed cases and more than 43,000 deaths. Very bad situation currently. Many areas of the country are either facing specific lockdowns or quarantines, and it is the case here in São Paulo where I am, and that's why I'm also at home today. And under this scenario, a lot of things had to change also regarding our sector and the work of the association. So to support the market, ABSOLAR immediately launched a new campaign called Solar Urgent, Solar Urgente in Portuguese, where we brought videos and informations for companies regarding access to financing lines from the government, how to deal with your workforce in this period of quarantine and work restrictions, management approaches and operational approaches for your company to be more effective, and also take new opportunities on board, such as digital commerce. So these were the type of activities we developed with Solar Urgent, also bringing relevant information about federal government, state government, and municipality relief programs focused on the productive sector, and that could be used by solar companies to stay afloat. And we also created a special video showing that the solar sector is not stopping during this period, and we're still generating important and renewable clean electricity competitive for the market to move forward and to support the activities of combating COVID-19 during this period. So these are some of the financing lines that we shared with our members, and we can later on share more information with you if you want to know more about the specific details of Solar Urgent campaign. But it's important to say small companies in Brazil were definitely the most impacted by COVID-19, and we had more than 14,000 small companies working in solar throughout the country. Many of those are very small companies, 1 to 2 people starting their business operations, and they have a very difficult moment to face, where they're still sometimes investing in their business, and there came this pandemic that reduced significantly their revenues. Revenue during the COVID-19 period that we're still facing in Brazil was reduced for distributed generation between 60-70% up to 90%, depending on the company. So imagine yourselves doing business on an environment such as that. But there is also good news on the horizon, and I want to highlight that. ABSOLAR has started to focus strongly on creating a series of recommendations to the federal and state governments regarding the opportunity of solar PV to become a strategic tool to help restart growth in Brazil, in the economy, bringing investments to the country, generating new quality jobs, creating new companies and new opportunities inside states and different regions of Brazil, to help also restart economy and bring more revenues to governments through tax collection, and also help to reduce electricity cost expenses from consumers, from the governments, using this technology. Also important to say, when we all overcome COVID-19, and I'm sure we will, working together and working cohesively as a society, when we overcome that, there is still another very important challenge of the 21st century that we need to have in our scope, which is, of course, climate change. And solar is a tool that will help on the 2 fronts, combating the economic impacts of COVID-19 and also helping our environment and our society in combating climate change. And because of that, we are very hopeful that solar will have an important role on restarting the Brazilian economy and supporting the transition to a cleaner and more sustainable world. Because of this pandemic, it's also important to say that large-scale projects were already also impacted. So the federal government in Brazil created a planning schedule for auctions in the country. This year, we were expecting 2 renewable energy auctions to take place, one in the first semester and one in the second semester. Because of COVID-19, these auctions are now postponed, and we're still waiting for new updates from the government, who is revising the demand for electricity and the expansion necessities of the electricity matrix, because there was also a very strong impact to the electricity demand during this period. Well, before finishing, I also wanted to invite you to a special event taking place in Brazil this year. This will be Intersolar South America 2020. It's already rescheduled for for November, mid-November, and we very much look forward to seeing you there. ABSOLAR is an exclusive partner of the conference. We take care of the content, and we support very strongly this event, which is the most important event in Brazil and South America about solar PV in general. So we look forward to seeing you there. Well, I wanted to thank you for your attention. Also looking forward to your questions. And it's a pleasure to be here with you today. And let's all together fight for a better world after COVID-19 with more solar, helping the economies come back and grow. Florian, that was it from my part. Back to you.
Thank you very much, though. That was a very meaningful and impressive presentation. Thank you very much for that, Rodrigo. We have a couple of questions, and I guess it's the best to discuss right now from the scratch. So one of the participants asked, when you said on slide 13, solar has the least variability, did you mean the energy source by itself or the electricity supply from PV?
Yes, thank you for the question. Solar photovoltaic has a small variability on a monthly and a yearly basis. This means that the amount of electricity generates on the month in total or throughout the years is quite stable. That's because of the latitude and longitude where we are. Not naturally, the latitude is the most important factor in this case. And since Brazil is a tropical country, an equatorial country, we have a very stable amount of solar resource coming throughout the year. Because of that, it's a different situation from what we find, for example, in European countries or in countries with high latitude overall. Japan is another example. We see that during the months of summer, there is a lot of electricity generation from solar, and in winter less. So in Brazil, this is less the case. We have a more stable generation throughout the year. On the other renewable energy sources, on the other hand, the situation is different. For example, I mentioned the wet months that have more rain and therefore more water available, and the dry months where we have less water available and therefore less hydroelectricity production. This is also the case for wind. We have a series of months in Brazil where wind is blowing stronger, and some months where there's almost no wind or less wind available. And because of that, the generation is also seasonal for this electricity source. And biomass is the same thing. When we have the months where biomass is being produced from sugarcane, because it's the sugarcane season, right? Then we have this biomass available, which is a byproduct of the sugarcane production, and that can be burned and that can be transformed into electricity. But there are months in the year where there is no sugarcane availability because it's still growing. And in these months, we don't have a lot of biomass hydroelectricity available. So solar, on the other hand, is more stable throughout the year. And this is very good for the planning of the electricity matrix.
Thank you so much. So the next question is about international investors, and to be particular, how do you recommend international investors to look at the Brazilian PV market despite the political and regulatory instability seen on the news worldwide?
Okay, well, first of all, it's important to say that despite a lot of the heat that we see in the political environment, the electricity sector in Brazil is very stable and considered a low-risk investment destination. It has been one of the sectors, one of the areas in Brazil with the highest amount of international investors coming to the country. So rest assured, it is a stable environment in terms of the auctions, the PPAs. We are, on the other hand, in the middle of a discussion of new rules for net metering. And this is something ABSOLAR is working intensively on so that we can avoid a negative outcome of net metering regulation changes. The good news is we have strong support on the Congress, as solar is a very it's a source that has a lot of popular support, and the politicians, they are very aware of this popular support of solar. 9 out of 10 Brazilians want to generate electricity from solar in their homes. So they are very much inclined to help us build a positive and strong solar legislation that can be a reliable base for the development of the market, not only on the short term, but on the mid and long term. Another thing that I think it's important for international investors to know and to consider is the culture. Brazil has a specific culture. It's a warm culture, a very personal culture as well. And doing business in Brazil is certainly different from doing business in Asia, in Europe, or in the United States, for example. So you have to adapt to this culture. And because of that, it's important to have a local team and a local office that will be your face in business and that can interface in Portuguese with your clients and help you build a strong networking base for your business operations. If you need any additional support, you can definitely count on AB Solar. We have a lot of intelligence, market information, and we can help you move forward in the Brazilian market, avoiding any mines in this field.
Great, thank you very much. How about PPAs? Are PPAs with private companies already a reality within the Brazilian energy market?
Yes, in fact, 2018 was the year where the first PPAs was started to being drafted, and the first contracts started coming online on 2019. These contracts, they require between 1 and 2 years before the project is completely built and operational. So now we are seeing this work in progress, first PPAs being developed, being built, and being put into action. But the good news is there is already a pipeline of more than 5.7 gigawatts. I will repeat the number, 5.7 gigawatts of private PPAs either under negotiation or already contracted, signed, meaning there is a lot of business opportunities here as well. And the main reason for that is solar electricity price. We became one of the most competitive electricity sources in the country. And companies who use a lot of electricity, the energy intensive sectors in Brazil, they need cheap electricity to remain competitive. So they are looking very much strongly into solar as an opportunity to reduce their costs as well.
That's very impressive. Thank you very much for letting that us know. There's one question about the deforestation, and the question is whether the deforestation will affect the hydropower generation in Brazil in the upcoming years, and if that might be more potential for solar energy in cases of covering shortfall. What do you think?
Well, I will complement the question. I think one part of it is deforestation because it can affect how where and how much rain we get in different areas of the country, right? We maybe you have heard of the so-called flying rivers in Brazil, which is the transpiration of the trees from the Amazon forest that become clouds and that bring this humidity to the other areas of the country as rain. So this is very important for the ecosystem. And there is a second aspect that I think it's very important and that can definitely affect the availability of water in the country, which is the climate change situation and global warming as a whole. We have already seen some important changes in the dry seasons in Brazil. These dry seasons are getting longer and longer. We had a very bad period of about 5 years in the recent past with lower amounts of rain that was very bad for our electricity matrix because we had to use more thermoelectric power plants that were generating electricity on a more expensive and polluting way. And the country is now in the middle of the process of diversifying its electricity matrix with more renewable energy sources such as solar, wind, biomass, and also changing its thermoelectric power plant matrix from oil-based and petrol-based power plants to gas-based power plants. This change will help to reduce the impacts on the environment and also to reduce our dependency on hydro reservoirs. Also regarding the Amazon, just another point that's important to notice, the government has launched a new program to bring off-grid systems to the Amazon region in Brazil. There are 9 states, about 300,000 people will be supplied with solar PV as being one of the main technologies that will be implemented during this project. It's about 72,000 families that will be benefiting from this program. So we are discussing this directly with the Ministry of Mines and Energy and helping them build this program. And we're looking forward, therefore, for a new opportunity in off-grid systems in Brazil as well, with solar plus energy storage.
So what is or will be the role of electric energy storage, so batteries in combinations with PV?
Yes, a very good question. Currently, Brazil is using energy storage mainly for off-grid systems, as I just mentioned. But because electricity prices are very high in Brazil, and we have prices for some clients that vary throughout the day, hourly electricity prices, there are some companies in Brazil that already use diesel generators to generate electricity in peak hours, to do some peak shaving of these costs of the electricity matrix. Of course, you can think on replacing these diesel generators by energy storage and combining it also with solar to have an interesting business plan and business model to start operating with storage in Brazil. Because of the complementarity and synergy between energy storage and solar, we have structured a new work group in ABSOLAR since 2019, who has the main role to help develop this new opportunity and market in the country, especially grid-connected energy storage with solar, small scale, medium scale, and large scale. And the way we are doing this is working on 4 pillars where we need still to structure the solutions for the sector. These are regulation, legislation, financing, and taxation. And these are the areas this work group is working on. I very much invite you to participate if you want to join us in this new opportunity, which is energy storage plus solar.
Thank you so much for saying that. So there's now a little bit change of when it comes then to the topic of manufacturing. So there's one question, how do you see the feasibility for new projects for solar module factories in Brazil, having in mind these factors you presented, like COVID-19 pandemic, like dollar exchange rates and solar project potential?
Okay, that's a good question. So first of all, important to say Brazil local value chain is already in place to some extent. We have a lot of manufacturers, about 40 manufacturers producing structures, trackers, modules, inverters in the country. Also some electric and electronic components that are used in PV, and about 100 assemblers that bring these components together in what we call solar kits, that are completed with all components necessary to put the systems on the rooftops or on small land areas. So there is a value chain already there. There are some special opportunities for companies from the value chain, such as specific financing lines, some tax incentives also for local manufacturers, and that could be interesting for companies who want to participate. ABSOLAR has mapped these opportunities in different regions of the country, so you can have an insights on that and all the legislation that is available for local manufacturing. But there is one important challenge that I have to highlight here, and that has to do with module manufacturing. So solar PV module manufacturing in Brazil is challenging because there is a high level of taxation of the raw materials. In some cases, this taxation can go up to 40, 50%. So if you compare producing a module outside of Brazil and in Brazil, you have these high taxes coming into your raw materials before it even arrives in your manufacturing site. And this is something that we are working with the Ministry of Economy to reduce this taxation so that manufacturing locally can become more competitive. We're in the middle of this discussion now. Of course, COVID-19 pandemic is not helping out during this discussion, unfortunately, but we are working forward to reduce this taxation on raw materials to make local manufacturing more competitive for solar PV modules. Regarding the other components of a module, such as the solar cell, wafers, and also high purity silicon, these segments of the value chain are not developed in Brazil so far, also because of the taxation. So this is something that we're working with the government, but it requires also volume to make sense, putting a power plant, a manufacturing site focused on these segments in Brazil. And despite of that, I see Brazil as possibly the only country in Latin America or South America specifically that has enough of a local market to justify manufacturing in the region. So not by chance, it has been selected by several companies as its manufacturing hub for PV components.
Thank you so much. So the next question is about regulation. So how will the new Decreto number 10387 transform the debt finance structuring of solar projects, both distributed and transmission connected generators?
Okay, well, that's a very good point. We recently had a very good announcement from the federal government, which is this new decree 10387 2020. This decree is basically allowing infrastructure bonds. So these are financing conditions, financing tools, mechanisms with special conditions that are available for infrastructure projects, right? So large-scale solar projects were already part of this infrastructure bond opportunity. And there are some companies who already used this vehicle in the past. Bond financing structures for distributed generation is something under development. There are already projects who managed to do this and to lead this new financing mechanism in the country, but they weren't done as infrastructure bond. What is the advantage of an infrastructure bond? They have some tax reliefs that reduce the cost of capital to get access to this financing and therefore make the projects more competitive. I was participating yesterday in a meeting with the lab, which is an initiative with several participants such as the IDB, GIZ, and other international institutions that help build and maintain the lab. And throughout the lab, with the support of our Vice President of Financing, Camila Ramos, ABSOLAR managed to recommend several improvements for this decree. And it's very good to notice that the new decree, which in the past had restrictions for distributed generation accessing this mechanism, this financing mechanism, was improved in a way that now we believe it's possible for distributed generation to access it. We already sent also letters to the Ministries of Mines and Energy and Economy to obtain more details on how this process will work. And there are still no operational details on how it will work, but it's important to say that this will be a very good tool to help accelerate the development of distributed generation projects and project blocks combined into blocks, especially projects with a little bit higher investment and size.
All right. Brazil is home to both numerous water reservoirs and strong agricultural sector, but both floating solar PV and agro PV is still in an infant stage of development. Will this change anytime soon in the future?
We hope it will. Both are very good opportunities for the solar sector to develop. We have been discussing with several entities from the government and ministries which ways we can use to implement these new solar solutions into the market. But I have to say that also there will be a normal process of market evolution that is based on prices. So if these technologies can show that they are competitive in comparison to other solutions, they can find new market opportunities. At ABSOLAR, we are working together, for example, with the Ministry of Agriculture to find ways to massify the use of solar in agriculture. And this could be agro PV, specifically using the same land area to produce agricultural goods and to produce electricity. But depending on the configuration and the competitiveness of the solution, it can also be using solar on a non-productive area that is available on the rural property, or using the rooftop of a building on the rural property per se. So which one is the better solution? The market will decide, right? So, but we are discussing this opportunity with the government, and we believe that there is room there for solutions such as floating PV and agro PV to be developed in Brazil.
Thank you so much. I can see that was the last question here in this session. So thank you very much again, Rodrigo. Very much appreciated your presentation and the very meaningful and interesting discussion over here. Please take care, and hopefully we see each other soon. For other participants, now we're going to have a coffee break, and after the coffee break, we will then start with the US session and see what's happening now in the United States. So thank you very much. Enjoy your days.
Thank you. Bye-bye.